Hi everyone, it's Yoke van Dam and Thomas Ramstad again on leadership lyrics. And today we're chatting about an interesting topic. We're talking about creating a sense of belonging at work. And we're chatting lightly about the importance of diversity and inclusion in your team and your culture, even when you're hiring people. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you for having me again. Have ever felt excluded in the workplace and how did that actually impact you?
I was at an a year or two ago, and what was interesting is as I was looking around at the audience, I realized that my culture wasn't necessarily represented in the room, but that wasn't an issue for me. Where I felt excluded was when people were asking questions only relating to their culture, their language, even their own racial orientation, and which made me really feel like, why should I even be here if you're asking a question which is only applicable to your own group of people? And I felt that at that time, I was wondering if I was even welcome in that space. And it was like a learning point for me to say that even if it's not the viewpoint of the organizers, if a question gets by someone in the audience which could exclude, it's very important that the MC can possibly rephrase it and make it more inclusive for everyone. And because very often culture can be such a touchy area, I didn't actually want to bring it up. But afterwards, I had a phone call with a friend and I was nearly in tears saying to her, this was such a terrible situation. And I felt that I wasn't welcome there. And why did I even go? And why did they then advertise it as an open event if they only wanted people that looks exactly like them in that environment?
Mm.
Have you ever felt excluded yourself in the workplace environment or at an event?
Not at an event, but I felt sort of slightly excluded or sort of the odd one out. Sometimes it's very obvious. Sometimes it's a bit more disguised, and you have to work a bit more to actually realize that it is happening. But when you have a group that is very homogeneous and it's all of the same, and you are the odd one out, and it's very difficult to resonate sometimes, and you have to listen a lot, and you feel that your opinion or what you have to say is not valued in the same way because sometimes it's very difficult to translate, and they don't have the same foundation and the same sort of experience, and sometimes they just feel like you are sort of a loony. That is, instead of feel like you are actually bringing experience and knowledge to the table. So yeah, that's a bit odd. Yeah.
I want to share a little story. I was at a stage, I was part of a group of moderators for this international training, and there was a very interesting inclusivity training that they did. And they actually brought actors in, and it was the worst kind of role play. So, what the corporate people had to do is they had to watch the scenarios. So, there were men, women, different cultures. It was all online. And then they had to afterwards say, where did they pick up people weren't being inclusive? What did they do wrong? What was the impact? And how would they actually address that person if that had to happen in the work environment? So,
Mm.
some of the examples was gender related. So, where the one man would assume that the lady has this amazing admin skills, even though she's a senior manager, just saying, will you do the minutes? So, diminishing someone in that regard. So, that was a gender based one. There was also a lot of sexist jokes about
Mm.
men and women that was like sneaking in. And then what was also quite concerning was they had cultural jokes. So let's say someone was from India, they would make jokes about curry or hot food, or
Mm.
say is your entire family from this continent, or so they would kind of stereotype. So whether it was gender, culture, language, all of that. So I think it was very helpful having that example of the worst things that people could do. But what we found is that the person, the actor that had to role play doing those things, he wasn't necessarily a bad person. He just did not know better. So he was putting
Mm,
people in boxes. And a lot of the people in the training were then saying they would just say HR just immediately needs to fire him,
mm,
where that's not necessarily always a solution. Sometimes it's about educating, pointing things out, bringing awareness. So for me, it was very helpful. These topics are so touchy. Now
mm,
there's
mm,
pronouns, and sometimes we might feel uncomfortable. Where if a person might look like a certain gender representation, but they want to be called her or he or they, it's about being comfortable enough to have the uncomfortable conversation and to
mm,
actually say, this is what I prefer.
mm,
Can you please try to do this? Because that's my boundary and that's what I want. So I think very often with this topic, people will rather sweep it under the carpet than speak about what they're not happy about. And in that training environment, it was actually so helpful because they could role play. How are they addressing this person that's now like violating their values? To actually, try it out and say, when you said that, that was so sexist, and I really felt so hurt. And when you
mm.
spoke about my culture in that way, you might not know this and this. So they actually had to get comfortable in an emotional, intelligent way, having the uncomfortable conversation. And I think for all of us in the business environment and in our lives, if you're not willing to actually tell people what you are unhappy about or what's making you uncomfortable, then no one can learn and grow and adapt their communication style.
You talked about gender because you have a program that you are sort of women in leadership. Why? And it's exclusive for women, is it?
It is. And what's interesting is I was asked to run this program. So there's a specific need in areas like the East where women feel more comfortable being in a space with just other women. So it's not a exclusive course on a leadership level. What we actually speak about in that space, I always speak about inclusivity right when we open it up to say, as a leader, the most important thing for you is to make everyone feel they're part of your team and to create that sense of belonging. And in this room, this course was perhaps for women, but for you as a leader, you can never exclude people that you're going to be hiring or working with or suppliers or clients. So if you're feeling more comfortable in this space to learn, that's great. But we're actually going to be talking about how can you as a leader be more inclusive with everyone. So I kind of like speak about the elephant in the room very very quickly. I've seen in South Africa there's a lot of men groups where men will speak about how can they be better leaders or fathers or better men in relationships, and how can they be better role models. So sometimes it's not a bad thing when a group that are like-minded can get together if they feel safe to discuss certain
Mm.
things. The ladies on these courses, I would ask them, what are your leadership challenges, team challenges? Do you have challenges being a female leader? And some would say, I find it hard to work with women. And some would say they're finding it challenging to work with men. Everyone has different needs and outlooks. We were discussing this when I was in Dubai just recently, that the title in itself actually excludes, which is not great. But that's why I also address it, because I work with men and women all the time. But that course specifically is like a little bit of a sisterhood, safe space where those women that are maybe not as extroverted can, in a safe space, learn to be better leaders.
So when you talk about exclusivity, being sort of the same sex, let's say you have a sales team. Do you think it's a good idea to hire people that are the same as the current sales team, or do you think it's a good idea to hire people that are actually different than the people?
I think diversity of personalities and communication style and knowledge and age is very important. So I would say different. One of the things that I do in both my leadership and team transformation is we do this e-color assessment where you're looking at your communication style. And a coaching client recently asked me that same question. And she said she did the assessment with her different teams. So they're in the real estate industry. And the one team had the two e-colors personality types, almost everyone. And there was one person that was different, while the other were very similar in the other side of things. And she wondered if she should move that person that was different. I said to her, no, you need to find more of those. And you definitely need that person to point out blind spots and create a bigger experience. Because very often, when I was at the Professional Speakers Convention earlier this year, they spoke about neurodiversity. If everyone that's surrounding you is exactly the same, you get into a vacuum of thought. Even in what you're searching on the internet, the algorithm will just show you what you already believe and think, and it will just reinforce that. And in the same way, you would get that groupthink in that work environment where you could have clients that believe the exact opposite and you could have blind spots. So if you're not actually bringing diversity and people that will challenge the same way of thinking, you could actually lose out on connecting with your clients. And maybe, like we spoke about in our previous episode, innovating and changing and adapting because you are just seeing this tunnel vision of the small way of seeing the world. And you need to actually be able to adapt to your clients because everyone is definitely not going to be like you. So I think flexibility is much more important so that you can actually cater for the clients is just being comfortable. So
So
it's
in
more,
order to have that diversity, you have to have a team or group that are actually diverse, but you also have to build a culture that encourages psychological safety so people feel safe to actually speak. And that is what you felt as well in your previous example.
yeah, we've spoken about culture a bit in the past and what you were bringing up just now. If you're creating a culture and you have strong core values in a business, you want to align people to those core values, but you want their personality styles and their communication styles to be different and to bring different layers of experience. A lot of my clients would struggle with younger employees. They would always moan about the millennials. And so they would maybe be baby boomers and they're struggling to connect because their way of working is so vastly different. And yet they can add so much value into each other's life and the experience of the clients. What are your thoughts on diversity of age in a business? Is that important for you?
I think it is important because, as you said, historically, that is actually how we have evolved. You know, telling stories. The elders are telling stories to the young ones. They are bringing on knowledge, they are bringing on experience, and people have sung songs, they have told stories that are containing vital information, for example, star maps and routes, so people can follow. So that's how we have survived and are now close to soon 8 billion people on this planet, and we have been on the moon. I think it's important to encourage the when it comes to not only age but diversity when it comes to sex and experience. And I think it's really sad that we can't meet, that we can't build a bridge, because if we can't build that bridge, you will not be able to innovate. And you have, for example, the baby boomers, they have a different sort of work ethics and how they do things. And then you have the various generations, X, Y, Z, and they think about things differently as well. But I think it's really important to meet sort of in the middle. If we do that, we are wasting so much experience, so much knowledge. And if you're an entrepreneur, you will fall into the same traps. And people have done this before. You're not that unique. You know, people have done this for several hundreds of years. And millions and millions of people have actually gone bankrupt. Thousands times they have failed. And there is so much knowledge. And I think it's really sad that we don't encourage people to build that gap so we can harvest that knowledge and experience. Yes,
So
totally.
harvesting the knowledge and experience, I was chatting to a client of mine yesterday, and we spoke about an issue that I see coming up everywhere where the knowledge would possibly lie in the person's head. So the baby boomer has all that knowledge and
Mm.
experience, and they've been with the business for years, and now they're getting close to retirement. And very often, when people leave, that's where people start having a panic attack because they're saying they're not doing a proper handover. But how important is it to actually tap into people's knowledge and not just have it in someone's head? Is there a way that you would say that people can perhaps capture some of that knowledge for the future generations?
Early on, you talked about teams that are diverse and just spending time together in a project, working together, discussing things, and people with more experience and knowledge can ask questions. And that is where you show yourself as a mentor. You ask questions. So, for example, people with less experience and probably less knowledge, and you make them think and you make them and if they don't get it, and you can sort of jump to the conclusion as well and just tell a story about how you did things, and I think it's a good idea to do this. Now, what do you think about this? And that is a way to actually tap into that experience and that knowledge and make people work together. Because if you separate them, for example, you have the generation X, Y, Z, and you have the baby boomers and the millennials, and you make them work in separate teams, then they can't tap into their various point of views and experience and knowledge. And then you have a barrier between the generations, and I think a lot of experience and knowledge is lost.
So, practically, what can potentially be done with those questions that you're asking? A colleague of mine from Australia, which she often does and uses, she offers private podcasts to her clients where people could have an internal private podcast where the millennial could actually interview the baby boomer or the Generation X. And that's where that cross sharing of knowledge can happen. And it can get captured on that private podcast that can then be a learning management system for future generations that can still listen to what was discussed there. So perhaps coming up with the questions that can have longevity for the future so it doesn't get lost. And I also
Yes.
love what we spoke about in terms of that culture. So even if people are diverse and they've got different knowledge and skills, you can also do a lot of culture interviews with the founders of a business or specific leaders, asking them for their insight and making sure that you get diverse perspectives on values or viewpoints. So, different ages, different genders, different religions, different cultures, everything, so that you get a fuller experience. And when there's onboarding, there's so much that they can go and listen to about the culture of the business, the
Yeah.
leadership styles, and the wisdom of the gurus that are maybe not around anymore or that have long ago gone fishing somewhere in the Bahamas. And hopefully that can add a lot of diversity to a learning experience as well.
I heard a story the other day. I think that resonates to a lot of people as well. There was a guy and he lost his parents and they were old, long
Mm,
life. So what is expected? But he actually cleaned the house and took out all the photographs and all the books and all the memories. He learned more about his parents after they had died, not during their life. So he was not tapping into their life. He was not interested at all.
sure.
And there you have two old people. They have experienced so much and they have so much knowledge. And there might be things that you don't want to know, and that's totally fine. But if you feel that you learn more about them when they're dead, and you sort of want to tap into information and knowledge of more experienced and older people after they have quit or after they are dead, it might be a bit too late.
And that's where, if you wanted to reframe that, that's why it's important to capture some of our ideas so that when we are not here anymore, so even if it's videos or audio, or it doesn't have to even be as formal as a book,
Yeah.
but that they can be wisdom that people can tap into. A friend of mine, she actually helps people to develop their legacy writing so that there can be a message that's actually staying behind after they're not there anymore. Because there's that saying that the graveyard is the place where most books and great ideas went to die. It's the richest place on earth. But I totally get you. It's about actually trying to make the most of our lives now and our experiences. And that's where that, I don't know if you've ever done the exercise, Thomas. Stephen Covey wrote that book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm not sure if it was in that one. He has an exercise where he says you need to write your own eulogy from the perspective of a friend, a colleague, a family member. And I was on this personal development course and I did it and I was shocked when I wrote it. And I had so many realizations at that stage about family members, where at that stage I was extremely selfish, newly married, and I did not spend enough time with my mom and my sister. And I realized they were very passive aggressive towards me. And I realized this is the reason why. Because if I wrote the eulogy from their perspective, they would say Yoko's very career driven and it's all about her business, that she doesn't actually make time for her family. And I was like, that's not the message I want them to say at my funeral, should I die now. So I try to think, what would I want them to say and what actions do I need to take now to make that change? So I think that's a very good exercise to do from your clients or colleagues' perspective as well. And if you're a leader, from your team's perspective, what would they say? Because if you're writing with that hat on, you'll be very able to see critically from their eyes how they see you, and that could be very good for self-awareness to notice what changes you want to make in terms of the legacy you want to leave behind. Not everyone
Yeah.
has the opportunity to make changes on their deathbed. A lot of people
No.
die in the moment in a car accident while they're still very young. So it's about every single day being the best person you can, or the best leader you can be, or the best version of yourself, and adapting in that
Yeah,
way.
and then get back to teams and diversity and working together and tapping into knowledge and experience. And then you have to work with people sort of different age or different nationalities or different cultures. And you have to work together and you have to understand each other. And then you can tap into knowledge and you can discuss. But there is really important to have a culture that encourages people all to respect each other. That's really important to build that bridge and be able to work together and tap into their heads so they're not lost.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining me today. I think there was really food for thought. And if we can create that psychological safe space, like you said, and respect each other, and also ask for feedback if there's anything that we need to change in order to make another person feel more respected or heard, or have that sense of belonging, we can have a much better work environment for everyone. See you soon, Thomas.
Thank you. See you.